Dear people, good evening. We are happy to greet you from Oris House of Architecture from Croatia. Now you are on Oris YouTube channel. Tonight we prepared for you the presentation of Lebbeus Woods exhibition. We'll have talks on his work and you'll have, I believe, the pleasure to listen our guests, friends of Lebbeus, from this gallery and from different parts of the world. Here in Oris gallery we have Lovor Kaprpić and Leo Modricin, both architects and professors from Zagreb School of Architecture, and Feđa Vukić, art historian and professor from Zagreb School of Design. We all are Lebbeus friends. We all admire his work, his thoughts, and especially his personality. Before you'll see the exhibition and the whole event, I just want to say a few words how my friendship with Lebbeus began. In 1987 or 86, as a young architect, I was in Stuttgart in Weisenhof Gallery when I saw for the first time in my life the drawings of Lebbeus. The experience struck me like a thunder. I was overwhelmed by emotions. It was unforgettable. Oh, what a day. At that time, I started my private architectural practice, but I was also one of editors of Croatian architectural magazine Man and Space. I had to write a short article on Lebbeus drawings and ideas. I dreamed to invite him to Zagreb to exhibit, to have a chance to listen his lecture. In 1989, I was in New York. I visited my friend Leo Modricin, and Leo told me, I know Lebbeus. The rest of the story is the legend here in Croatia. In 1991, Lebbeus finally landed in Zagreb. We organized his exhibition in Museum of Applied Art. We spent some days and nights together. It was extraordinary time. And now, 30 years later, after this poster, we have the same exhibition here in Oris Gallery. The editors made excellent catalog now and will host his friends and followers. What a moment. Enjoy this night and take care.
Lebbeus Woods wrote in 2003 a little manifesto called By Way of Resistance. And this is Lebbeus' words. It seems to me, if architects really want to resist, then neither the idea nor the rhetoric of resistance has a place in it. Rather, they must create an independent idea of architecture and the world. One looks for principles, but we are better off if we control them, not the other way around. Principles can become the tyrants foreclosing our ability to learn. When they do, they too must be resisted. And then, you can still access all of his work on his website. So I chose 14 points of resistance. Resist whatever seems inevitable. Resist people who seem invincible. Resist any idea that contains the word algorithm. Resist the impulse to draw blob shapes. Resist the desire to travel to Paris in the spring. Resist the desire to move to Los Angeles anytime. Resist the idea that architecture is a building. Resist the idea that architecture can save the world. Resist the hope that you'll get that big job. Resist getting jobs. Resist taking the path of least resistance. Resist the temptation to talk fast, so I should slow down. Resist anyone who asks you to design only the visible part. Resist the idea that you need a client to make architecture.
Greetings to all. Good morning, good afternoon, dobre večer. On behalf of the estate of Lebbeus Woods, it is my pleasure to be able to thank all who made this project possible. Friends and colleagues in Los Angeles via Rome, in Vienna, in San Francisco, and in New York. The image behind me is a drawing by Lebbeus Woods, perhaps the most intimate one of the Zagreb Free Zone. My deepest gratitude goes to Zagreb, to Oris House of Architecture, our host, and to its founder, Andrija Rusan, to the Architecture Faculty of the University of Zagreb, and to the Museum of Arts and Crafts and its director, Miroslav Gasparovic. What started as marking the 30th anniversary of an exhibit, Zagreb Free Zone, quickly outgrew its initial modesty. Those who first recognized that this can, even must be done, were Lovorka Prpic, Leo Modrcin, and Sven Soric, all extraordinary collaborators on both the exhibition and the catalogue. Thank you for your dedication and for the generosity of your spirit. Having had the privilege to preview what we are about to hear in the next hour, I remain drawn to a statement addressing one of the many potentials of architecture, a word female in a gendered Croatian language, arhitektura. We may live without architecture and worship without architecture, but we cannot remember without her. As this is also an inquiry into a memory of an event, its revisitation, I will lend a memory of mine. What is today referred to as turbulent 1991 was not known to an American while he worked on the first rendition of the project. I doubt it was clear to us, citizens of Zagreb, and of a country that no longer exists. The only thing clear, perhaps, was an image of a crossroad, a landscape in which many a different road could be taken. With Zagreb Free Zone, Lebbeus Woods worked within that space of potential, which includes the precariousness of human condition, as well as human fallibility. He worked within a space of not utopia, but hope. What has been and what shall be? Who will do the work of emergency? Who of emergence? On the fast shifting grounds of Europe of that time, will one choose to consecrate, restore, erase, destroy, or can one do something else? That is a lens, perhaps, and still just one of many, through which to think about Zagreb Free Zone. What may have seemed as a tyrannical isolation in 1991, one structure, one inhabitant, one node of interconnecting technology, is closer to our lived reality in 2021 than even the author could have imagined. We remain between what has been and what shall be, yet with one important corrective. What to do now, when many of us have a clearer sense of a shared fate? when Zagreb is a truly global city, sharing earthquakes with California, Zooms with New York, conservation ambitions with Vienna, or with anyone otherwise conservative, snow in April, and the need for a vaccine with the rest of the world. It is to the sense of our now that Zagreb Free Zone Revisited may speak, so I close with such a present. I thank Ivan Josip Skender for his poem of 2015 and salute the Music Biennale Zagreb, now in session. I thank Laszlo Krasnahorkai for making contact with Lebbeus Woods and the MoMA PS1 show, Greater New York, and for rendering it as part of his own version of the Manhattan Project. More than anything, and with a nod to the newly found friends from Zagreb Arskopia and Sveučilišna Tiskara, I salute all who print the unprintable and think the unthinkable. Hvala.
I'm frequently asked about the background story and the connection with Lebbeus Woods. It was one of those serendipitous moments. My first day in graduate school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, my first teacher was Lebbeus Woods. As I like to say, the rest, at least in my life, is history. It was incredible privilege to continue working with Lebbeus as his young assistant on many projects, making models, some assistance with preparation of his drawings, but very basic. Lebbeus Woods was an architect who did everything by himself. He wasn't a producer of a team. His incredible ability to draw could only be executed by himself, by the master himself. When an invitation came from Zagreb, from our colleague Andrea Rusan, the director of the Oris Gallery where we now sit, I was the connection between New York, between Lebbeus Woods and Zagreb. My role in the project was not related to any form of a production on drawings. The notion of a background researcher sounds really interesting to me. Maybe true, I did provide some background information, knowledge, some maps, maybe even some cultural references to Lebbeus. But he himself was already prepared somehow to accept the whole range of cultural, architectural, social, political issues related to Croatia at that time, or former Yugoslavia at the time, that he was the one who actually researched. When we came to Zagreb with the exhibition, my role was to somehow be the liaison between him in preparation of the exhibition, and maybe later when there was a true possibility that one of his free space structures would be built in the courtyard of the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Zagreb. I'm often asked about memories of the actual event, and I find out myself in some kind of dilemma. I cannot distinguish or recognize what are my real memories of the event and what is the post-production, the research that we went through in preparation of this project. And this confusion, in a way, is symbolic, perhaps, even of Lebbeus's own approach to architecture, to life, to the times of the turbulent 1991 in Zagreb, where everything was fluid, in a flux. So my role in that sense was of somebody who emotionally lived through these dramatic events in my own home country, in my own culture, But he, as a real architect, a true architect, not some kind of visionary architect, or I would even say an architect of apocalypse, immediately took all these issues as a foundation of his own work. He was constructive when the times were destructive, in a sense, when the destruction was in the air. And that, for me, is one of the most significant discoveries which I saw, I would even say, happily, cheerfully attempt to share with my own students. This idea that architecture has a role, very important role, but you have to find the way how to work and act as an architect, and how to change the world as an architect.
The Getty Research Institute, one of the most important cultural institutes in the world, hold in their possessions Berlin Free Zone project by Lebbeus Woods. This is the project that directly preceded Zagreb Free Zone project. It is a great pleasure to greet today their senior curator of architecture, Maristela Casciato from Rome. Maristela, ti salutiamo da Zagabria. Prego.
Hello to everyone. My name is Maristela Casciato. I'm the senior curator, head of architectural collection at the Getty Research Institute, most often known with the acronym GRI, in Los Angeles. This message reaches Zagreb from Roma. This proximity makes me feeling to participate almost in person in this event, which marks the reinstallation of an extraordinary exhibition, Lebbeus Woods, mounted in Zagreb 30 years ago. Let me begin thanking Alexandra Wagner for inviting me to address the curatorial team in Zagreb with a brief message, and Lovorka Kricic, who kindly provided me with some documentation. Grazie, Lovorka. At the GRI, where I work since 2016, I first met Lebbeus' oeuvre by means of his drawings and journals. If I recall well, it was a couple of months after I took this new position. Then, a colleague from SciArc, who had planned to visit the GRI with his students, included Lebbeus' archival documents held in special collection in his request to the librarians. Immediately and unexpectedly, I was given the opportunity to start an investigation into Lebbeus' life, his practice, and his work. This paramount research project is still under evolution. The initial acquisition of Lebbeus documents in 1990 included 24 drawings and one text panel for the unrealized Berlin Free Zone project, and 20 journals dating from May 17, 1988 to April 4, 1997. A few words about the journals, whose contents are partially directly related to this exhibition. They include notes from lectures and classes, observation made during symposia, description of people and event, and drawings, an average of 20 drawings per journal. One aspect is specifically significant. Many of these journals deal with Lebbeus' experiences in Bosnia during the war with Serbia and Croatia. The Berlin Free Zone project, designed soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall, was conceived as an illustration of how periods of social upheavals are also opportunity of creative freedom. The architect was at the time 49 years old. He had produced works that were aesthetically inventive and piercing social commentaries. His design were widely influential, that made him a cult figure among students and academics. Considering a temporal perspective on intellectual exchanges and engagement, it is not surprising that Berlin Free Zone was exhibited on February 1991 at the Aedes Gallery in Berlin, and Zagreb Free Zone opened in April 1991, the same year. Conceptually, the two projects are directly linked. They live in a reciprocal continuity. Berlin Free Zone is a conceptual project, more theoretical than practical. Lebbeus warned the prospective builders and users, I quote, "You can't bring your old habits here." And I'll come back to this later. "If you want to participate, you will have to reinvent yourself and your work," also coming later, end quote. And the reinvention, the architect claims, is first and mainly an act of sociological and humanitarian reappropriation, and according to his vocabulary, the creation of a network of free spaces. These are both meaningless and useless, the results of a non a priori grounded on a system for organizing space, time, and society, guided by heterarchy. I quote again, "The subversion of an existing authoritarian system of control is accomplished by architectural means. Subversion by constructive means immediately becomes an affirmation. The construction within and in opposition to an existing one amounts to an act of reunification," end quote. It is clear that Berlin Free Zone aims to undermine the regimes of East and West Germany ideologically, from where it derives the seminal concept of the free zone that appears in the title, a sociological ground of reunification free from any political agenda, an humanitarian agenda rather. As said, Berlin Free Zone proposes a radical revision of the city's then divided Mitte by fundamentally undermining the Berlin Wall. Woods envision an underground city where irregular shards, slivers, and fragments slice through existing buildings to establish new spatial political realities. The builders of this city, continues the architect, have sought political independence by going beneath the surface of the earth, under the wall, subverting the design of occupying political rivals, and have found something unexpected.
Peter Never was with us 30 years ago at the original exhibition, not only as a director of the Viennese Museum of Arts and Crafts, but also as a very close friend and collaborator of Lebbeus Woods. It's a great privilege to have Peter with us again.
A little bit chilly, but blue sky over Vienna, sunshine. We are actually on top of a modern building, of one of the very few modern buildings in the city of Vienna, and thinking on Lebbeus. Remembering Lebbeus, it is always a challenge. A challenge what we are, what we want to do, where we really want to go. And do we really want to break the hierarchical order of our cities? This is also the case in the city we are, which more than almost any other wants to maintain the status quo with great satisfaction. The city center, littered with palaces, is taboo. Architects are not allowed in here. They are pushed to the outskirts, if at all. With System Vienna and the exhibition, the main aim was to create a new way of seeing, thinking, and living in connection with aesthetic intelligence, if I may call it like that. Yeah. Okay, this is the surrounding changed, but I want to concentrate on Lebbeus and this terrace we are standing on. The official Vienna united against me. They did everything to make this not happen, to build this terrace. In the very end, international architects protect me, especially Lebbeus, who made also a project for the terrace, and in the very end, it was possible, against the ideas of the city, to build this terrace. And this terrace was a kind of the idea to open the hand for the artist to have intervention at the outdoor of the museum. He was always curious. He never wanted to go to sleep. He wanted to catch everything. He was curious to understand the way how the people are moving, how they are thinking. Most of the time in the morning he came with an idea, with project, with drawings. He was able, I think he went into the city. He screwed himself in the city, and this, I think, is a very special dimension. He was not on the table to design project. He had this kind of really understanding, this real dialogue wherever he went, to Sarajevo, to Zagreb, to Berlin or San Francisco. He really tried to understand the idea of the city where he is. And I think this is a very important, it's also for students very important to understand that making urban planning, making city planning, you have to go closer, you have to go deeper. And he always was, he was on fire, he was burning for his ideas. I also remember in 2005 there were 3 exhibitions in a row at the Mack Gallery. The young artist Michael Kinzer, was the exhibition with the title Neue Immobilien, Lebbeus Woods with System Vienna, and Alexander Rodchenko, Raumkonstruktionen. That was impressive. That clearly showed how different individual approaches, convincing artistic potential through the thoughtful re-angularization of structures, can prevent stagnation. And I think this is the power of the avant-garde, the power of the art to push the society forward.
Remembering the exhibition Zagreb Free Zone today, 3 decades later, means in the first place remembering the author himself, Lebbeus Woods, an author who was the foremost among the others, personalities who in a way rethought the way the architecture was think about for decades. He was the experimentator, the founder of something that today by standard is referred to as a speculative architecture. And in the first place, maybe he was the one who was set to free the architectural thinking from the usual or standard or even traditional burdens of physical, aesthetic, tectonic, social and ideological conditions. Within this, he offered us as his legacy most interesting concepts as terra nova in the militarized zone in Korea, underground Berlin, a proposal for subtle unification of the divided city, Berlin, and also his thinking about the city affected by war in his projects, Zagreb Free Zone, and later even in one project for Sarajevo. The Zagreb project was initiated and executed when the war already started. So in a way, reality gave a special context for this essential idea of rethinking the idea, the very concept of freedom within the terms of architecture in the specific context of the city of Zagreb. So basically, remembering the exhibition today perhaps offers, in the first place, an opportunity to think about the possibilities to really reach the freedom in the specific context of the city and the republic. Remembering Lebbeus as a friend, as a human being, as a creative author, today, I would say the basic issue, the notion or the concept of freedom today could be summarized in one sentence, a sentence created by Chris Christopherson, which, as you might recall, goes, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. So being in a position as Lebbeus was for decades, in a position when he claimed his freedom in thinking about architecture, and thanks to this, having the opportunity to lose nothing, basically allowed him to have a completely free mind to think about the architecture. This is the legacy that somehow, and I hope so, will serve for a further creative and inspirational thinking about any possible means or field of human activity, and especially in architecture.
This project, Berlin Free Zone and Zagreb Free Zone, mark a place. It is worth noting that the marking act is then a public act. It is the function of a society's taking possession upon a place being conceptually an empty space. It starts being like the forum or the agora in the ancient cities, for which the project is fixing its outlines. This process, the marking of another place within the existing city, constitutes most of the physical part of establishing a new civilization or a new world. Directly linked to the concept of place, in the trilogy Berlin Free Zone, Zagreb Free Zone, and later Sarajevo Free Zone, a project of 1993-96, architecture is serving the causes of memory and society. As Stanford Anderson explained in his essay, Memory in Architecture, published in Dialogues in 1995. We may live without architecture and worship without architecture, but we cannot remember without her. What Woods aimed to create was an intimate link between built form and the society which upholds it. In conclusion, I wish to go back to Lebbeus' words about what generates a unique aspect of the everyday in Berlin and Zagreb free zones. I quote, "When we discuss architecture, we make buildings the focus of our attention, but that is an unusual condition. The buildings that are involved in our daily lives are part of our system of habits, a concept we already discussed, and we live our lives within them. And in the big background, unproblematically, as unconscious of their role as we are of the air we breathe or the time that is passing. In order to understand the relationship that we have with buildings, we need to take note of the way habits are formed and how they become part of who we are." End quote. Free spaces for free individuals in a free society. Thank you for the attention and the best wishes for this great exhibition.
He's a colleague by Lebbeus Woods. He's an architect from New York. His name is Stephen Hall.
I'm Stephen Hall, standing in our archive in Rhinebeck, and I heard this exhibition is in Zagreb, and so here's an image of me at Days of Oris 13 years ago in Zagreb, speaking with David Adjei and a number of others. And I just want to reflect about Lebbeus Woods, who was very important in my life. I first met Lebbeus Woods in 1977 in New York on the invitation of Andrew McNair. He said, "You must meet Lebbeus Woods." I just arrived to New York City from San Francisco on an excursion ticket, actually, and I ended up staying, and I'm still here. So it's been an amazing change in my life to be in New York, but I'm sure Lebbeus Woods was one of the reasons why I stayed. I remember going to 7 Harrison Street and knocking on the door, and Lebbeus was drawing on a huge perspective whose vanishing points were set up like across the room. And he said, "Come in," and he didn't turn around, and he had a long cigarette ash. And I remember before he even turned around, I think I picked up the ashtray and caught that ash. And we started to talk, and we had an immediate camaraderie. We were both sort of angry young architects. I think I was just turned 30, and Lebbeus was 37. And we talked about the lack of criticism and the lack of theory in architecture and the kind of problem of the day. And at that point, we would begin having meetings at the Square Diner down in the Soho. It's still there, I think, the Square Diner, a diner where you could get all you could eat of bean soup for $1. And we'd meet there for lunch. And these meetings, I wanted to start a magazine, Pamphlet Architecture. Lebbeus was 100% behind it. He was a critic. And later on, I think it was a 3rd or 4th issue, he did by my invitation, he did a project called Einstein's Tomb. Still today, one of the most remarkable theoretical projects of Lebbeus. And it was reissued, that pamphlet was reissued by William Stout Architectural Books the year that Lebbeus died. One of the things that I think is hard to explain, that I think he had a deep influence on many of my projects, because he would often come to the studio and criticize them. For example, when we were in the competition for the AGB library in Berlin, maybe the first competition that I won, in Berlin in 1988-89, Lebbeus came to the studio a couple of times. We had lunch pinups or critiques. Also for the Palazzo del Cinema project in 1990 in Venice, I remember even what he said. We were talking about the difficulty I was having in figuring out how to, I had this idea of a bottle and the idea of time being compressed or expanded depending on cinema. You could take an event that lasted 10 years and put it into an hour, or you could take an event that lasted 2 minutes and stretch it into an hour. So cinema time had this kind of expansive, and Lebbeus and I, would chew on these ideas, and anyway, together we came with how to resolve the elevations of that building. That cinema burns holes in architecture. In the end, we were working on a project together, the Light Pavilion in Chengdu. It's a project, a large project where I made a big public space, and it's called sliced porosity block. The buildings themselves are just the structural exoskeleton coming up, and it's sliced by the sunlight. And then the other idea was buildings within buildings. And Lebbeus Woods, on my invitation, did the Light Pavilion, and we realized that construction. Standing here in the Light Pavilion of Lebbeus Woods in Chengdu, in our sliced porosity block, is an amazing experience. Lebbeus has realized a work that is actually everything he ever drew, anti-gravitational. The feeling of up is down, the feeling of down is up. It's an amazing piece cut into the side of this building, which when you occupy it, you really understand the work and the sort of feeling, the vision of Lebbeus's work. And I'm really enormously excited that this piece of architecture got realized.
There is a kind of dissolve of infinity going up, infinity going over, infinity going down. You actually lose the sense of gravity. What's amazing is in 2 weeks' time, since this has been lit every night at 6 o'clock, and people have seen it, they begin to call it Shugwan, which is time light. It's an incredible poetic justice, because the entire idea of three valleys suspended in time is what organizes the entire public space here. So I'm sure Lebbeus would be happy that it's Shugwan, time light.
The panels exposed at this exhibition here in the Oris House of Architecture are the very same panels which were brought by Lebbeus Woods in 1991 to the Museum of Arts and Crafts to Zagreb. They were brought, rolled in a tube for carrying projects by himself on a plane. This was their first transatlantic journey. The second one they made back to New York 20 years later, and the third one was done in February last year, in the eve of the COVID crisis. Once we opened this roll and realized its content, which was so modern, so contemporary, more contemporary maybe than ever. And this is what makes an open work. It is a work with no end. It is just a work that can maybe hibernate, like these panels hibernated in the tube, in the roll for 30 years. But once they're open, they're alive and maybe more alive than ever. This means that just as Lebbeus Woods composed the concept of free space structures in the streets of Zagreb for the project Zagreb Free Zone, as structures which look like aliens in the street, which don't have a pre-composed function, for which every person that inhabits them has to invent their role, their function, their use, but actually what they have to do is reinvent themselves. But what he wanted is for individuals first to liberate themselves, to become free, to develop as individuals on their own, and which is actually maybe the beginning for the battle for a free society. What he was talking about is anti-gravitational architecture. Anti-gravitational does not mean that something is not connected to the earth literally, but is something that is in a constant battle against lying down, which eventually brings us to perpetual bed, which means maybe grave or death. His motto was to stand despite all possibilities to fall. What Lebbeus Woods said is, we know that in the end we will lose this battle against gravity eventually, because we will all eventually die. But it doesn't mean that there is no purpose in fighting. We need to fight. That is, we need to fly as high as we can. All the projects are actually composed already in the notebooks. Later, in later phases, they may be colored, they may be enhanced, like here. They can be also montaged. Here we exposed several collages, which are manual collages. But this is actually like collage, the montage is actual method that enables an alien object to be inserted in the everyday structure of a city. That's what he wanted. The visual iterations, the graphical iterations by Lebbeus Woods, like drawing first in a small scale notebook, then enlarging it, then coloring it, then inserting other pieces and collages are iterations, but it doesn't mean they're repetitions. Every iteration has its own additional layer.
San Francisco Museum of Modern Art maintains one of the largest collections of the works by Lebbeus Woods. We are joined tonight by Jennifer Dunlop Fletcher and Joseph Becker.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Joseph.
It is, well, I think when this is broadcast, it's going to be morning in San Francisco and evening in Zagreb. And we are very pleased to be joining everybody for the celebration of Zagreb Free Zone and the 30th anniversary of the mounting of that exhibition. So we are here to speak a little bit on Lebbeus Woods and our relationship to the architect and to the architect's work in celebration. And to be able to provide a little bit of this context, it's helpful to understand the role SFMOMA has played in bringing Woods's work to a larger audience. And that relationship really dates back to 1996, 1995, with the commission of a project called Inhabiting the Quake. which was commissioned by Aaron Betsky, a previous curator of architecture and design. Jennifer and I we've both been very engaged with Lebbeus's work and kind of inherited part of this relationship that SFMOMA had with Lebbeus. And that led us to co-curating an exhibition on his work called Lebbeus Woods Architect. Maybe Jennifer, if you want to speak a little bit towards what Lebbeus Woods Architect was.
Yes, I'd love to go back just a little bit, just to mention for the listeners that the SFMOMA's history of collecting the work of Lebbeus Woods is really important to the collection, because the collection is maybe only 35 years old. So really from the beginning of SFMOMA's interest in collecting architecture, Lebbeus Woods' work was very prominent, and I would say is one of the practitioners that encapsulates an interest in a conceptual, provocative, critical thinking architecture. And as you mentioned, Joseph, you and I were tasked with the 2012 exhibition for the Architecture and Design Galleries, and that year is significant in the museum's history because the museum was about to close for a few years while it was undergoing a building expansion. And when we were brainstorming, you and I both had the same idea of Lebbeus Woods. What a perfect time when a museum's going through such a significant transition to bring in Lebbeus Woods into the conversation. We knew it was going to be our last time in the Architecture and Design Galleries, as they had been designed by Maria Boda at the time. And we thought that would be a fitting conversation. That introduced us to the Zagreb Free Zone works, and which are not in our collection, but did give us the opportunity to think about his work more broadly in a political context. And I know that is something that has been a bit of a seed for you and the works that you're really exploring.
Well, in a way, Woods occupies this incredible position in our collection as we focused on aspects of architecture from the experimental to the production and professional practice side. But the two of our interests align really in this state of architecture as kind of experimentation and provocation. And a key aspect of Woods's practice, kind of emerging out of this moment in the early 1990s, late 1980s, surrounding the Zagreb Free Zone work, is about what architecture's role is as we create and craft and hone our society and attempt to achieve our better ideals. And that's kind of a very important aspect for me on what the purpose of experimental architecture is. Is it just to provoke challenges to typical confines within architecture, code, gravity, client, budget, or is it really to ask us what is the potential of our cities? What can our cities do for us? And how is architecture complicit in that, or active?
What I really love and appreciate about the works that we were able to exhibit, Aerial Paris and Underground Berlin, just that the idea of a free zone, even if it's in a scarred building or above a building or below a building, it's in these, what would be the right word, undervalued spaces. And in those spaces, it feels to me like Lebbeus Woods was saying that this is where the real conversation begins.
Mm-hmm.
I think we haven't really discussed woods in connection to an environmental perspective. And it is, we are not just sitting on a fault zone, we're in a fire zone. We are in Northern California faced every year with yet another challenge brought on by climate change. And it is interesting how prescient the fragility of building architecture today. What does that even mean in this land, on this earth? How you can see little seeds of it already in Woods's work, especially in that series that you mentioned, the Quake.
Yeah, all the different contexts of climactic concerns, social concerns, political concerns, certainly. And, you know, in the Zagreb work, responding to a city on the precipice, a region on the precipice of chaos, and how architecture might facilitate, again, an alternative, a path forward.
This was just on the cusp of the internet becoming so widely used. And we know in the Bay Area so well that the practitioners here were hoping the internet would be a bit of a free zone, and all of a sudden are realizing that it's maybe not as free as originally thought. I was just thinking about I don't know, this notion of speaking truth in architecture and what it should or could reveal in its relationship to just the free zone projects.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we need to keep in the back of our minds as practitioners. You know, what are the truths that architecture can reveal? I think that's beautifully put. We're also really pleased to be exhibiting some of Lebbeus Woods's earlier work at SFMOMA right now, a project called Einstein Tomb from 1980, which is his proposal for pamphlet 6, number 6 in the pamphlet architecture series published by William Stout, San Francisco publisher and architectural bookseller. And we have that work on view, which is, it's an interesting moment right now to consider the idea of the monument. And Einstein Tomb was a proposal for a hypothetical tomb commemorating the life of Albert Einstein. It would be an object not to be seen in person, a tomb shot into space, riding a beam of light to the edges of the universe and beyond, potentially returning as the universe space-time continuum curves back upon itself.
This was such an important project for us institutionally, one of the earliest projects by Woods. And I really appreciate how you noted the context of the pamphlet, the book, as the space where these ideas were first presented as a dialogue, as a conversation starter. And yes, as you mentioned, the time of San Francisco, I think, we lost something like 30 memorials around the city in the last year, memorials that represented very unfortunate thinking for many people. And what is so beautiful about the Einstein Tomb project, it just seems so dynamic and the opposite of a static memorial, a static thinking. And can't we really invest in more of this type of memorial or history making?
Perhaps it's become kind of an inadvertent political statement, this work of Einstein Tomb. And I also really am interested in this idea of architecture as communication and the role of the pamphlet, for example, as a medium for broadcasting ideas. And, you know, here we are in two different places in San Francisco, but speaking to perhaps quite a global audience right now on the occasion of this exhibition in Zagreb. And we hope that many of you will come and see Einstein Tomb on view, and with any luck, we'll be able to see some of what's happening in Croatia as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you, Jennifer.
Bye, Joseph.
The book I'm holding in my hands is not only a book about the exhibition, it's the exhibition itself, the same one which was in Zagreb in 1991. We had this exhibition folded into a folder, but also we have another side, the revisited side, which is the documentation of things which had happened since 1991, since the original exhibition. To make this book was a challenge of a sort, not only because Lebbeus Woods' strong graphic language, his tremendous drawings, collages, sketches, we fit into this book, but also because of the structure we wanted to put inside, because of the story we wanted to narrate. The design itself is minimal, black and white, very, very calm, just because we wanted to emphasize what Lebbeus wanted to say with this project. It is not our place to reinterpret the project, but it's our task and our will to make this project live further. The contents of the folder we have are the contents we found in the tube when we opened it 30 years after it first arrived in Zagreb. Luckily or unluckily, due to this pandemic, we managed to bring you the whole exhibition into your hands. So instead of visiting this beautiful gallery in Zagreb, you could actually leaf through the book and see what the original idea from the 90s was. Sometimes it's hard for a graphic designer not to put his own aesthetic into a project he's working on, especially when the content is so powerful and unique as the content we were dealing with. This book has no front cover, no back cover. It doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end. As to my understanding, this book is an artifact. It is a free zone in itself.
If there were such a thing as an idea that was immortal and would live without us, then we wouldn't have anything to do. But because we die, and because knowledge in the form of ideas can't be transferred directly, everyone has to invent them all over again for themselves. And part of what our social existence is about helping each other do that. No one does it alone. None of us human beings do it alone. None. And so even though there are no new ideas, it's as though they're new when we have to bring them out of nothing again, out of the nothingness of our existence. If you're doing work on a certain level, it's always autobiographical. Certainly in my case, the kind of itinerant and in a way, rootless in terms of a particular place. The way of life I knew as a child certainly impacted my later work and made my interest, in a sense, in solving my own problem because I had the problem of being a kind of wanderer, and that presents certain problems. So in a sense, through architecture, through my work as an architect, I've been trying to resolve that on a very personal level in the first place. But naturally, seeing that others have that same problem, that we live in this kind of mobile and itinerant society, even as long ago as the 40s, I began to think, well, maybe there are others who have the same problem they're trying to solve. So I would hope that the work in that sense becomes public. It becomes, at least it addresses certain people in the society who are trying to find a way to live in this highly fluid or rootless condition. I'm basically a pessimist. And I don't want any rose-colored lenses and kind of optimistic projections about how everything's going to turn out fine. I don't think it probably will turn out fine. But I think that then the challenge to live becomes, well, what can you do with that? What can you do if it's not going to turn out fine? If your whole life is based on the fact it's all going to come up the right way or the way you want, well, that's one way to operate. But if you really realize that death is going to cancel you out, and that human fallibility and the general nature of the human condition is such that probably it all gets canceled out one way or the other. Now, what can you do with that? That's a much more interesting challenge to me as a human being than to affect some optimistic view of life. So the black has to do very much with that starting point. Let's start with the darkness, and let's see what kind of light we can create out of it. I was fortunate that I was able, slowly, and with a lot of mistakes, still making a few along the way, but to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue, that I felt were important to me, that gave me a reason to live. And I was able to do that. But part of the reason was that I was just determined that I had to find that way. And I think that's what each of you needs to do also. There's a lot of pressure to not do that. And we're in a profession and in a field of human activity where it's rather difficult to do that. If you were a painter or a sculptor, maybe someone would officially give you more license to do something like that. But architecture is a field where it can be done if you define what it is that you really want to do and believe in.